Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight we're going into Alaska's national parks, and trust me, what happens there is way scarier than any bear or snowstorm. These are real stories from real people. A teacher on a family camping trip, a nurse who just wanted a vacation, a mechanic taking his wife and kid to see glaciers, a teenager trying to prove he could survive alone, a park ranger doing his regular job, a photographer on assignment, a survival instructor teaching a class, and a truck driver making one delivery. 8 normal people. 8 trips to Alaska, but something was waiting for them out there in the wilderness, something that changed their lives forever. What did they find? What was watching them from the trees? And why did some of them say they wish they never came back? If you want to find out, hit that subscribe button and turn off the lights. Let's start with the first story.
My name is Susan Martinez, and I've been teaching elementary school for 12 years. I love working with kids because they see the world in simple ways. One of their, everything is either good or bad, happy or sad. There's no gray area with 7-year-olds. I wish my own life was that simple. I teach 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary in Sacramento. Every day, I help kids learn about honesty, family values, and telling the truth. I put up posters that say, honesty is the best policy and family first. I really believed those things. I thought I came from a good family with strong values. I was wrong about everything. What happened last summer at Denali National Park changed how I see my family forever. It changed how I see myself. Some secrets are buried so deep that even the frozen ground can't keep them hidden forever. The camping trip was supposed to be perfect. My grandmother Rosa was turning 80, and she wanted all her children and grandchildren together in Alaska. She said Denali was special to our family. We'd been camping there every few years since I was little. This is where your great-grandfather built his cabin. Grandma Rosa always told us. Before it became parkland, this place is in our blood. She made it sound magical, like we belonged there. There were 15 of us on this trip. My parents, my 2 brothers and their wives, my sister and her teenage daughter Maya, plus all the little cousins. We rented a big campsite near the Teclanica River. The ranger told us we were lucky to get the spot. Most people book years ahead. The weather was perfect for late July. About 60 degrees during the day, dropping to 40 at night. Perfect camping weather. We set up our tents in a circle, just like we always did. Grandma Rosa sat in her camping chair in the middle, watching us work and telling stories about the old days. Your great-grandfather Carlos was so smart, she said, smiling. He knew this land would be protected someday. He picked the perfect spot. Maya, my 16-year-old niece, was more interested in her phone than family stories. But the phone had no signal out there. After complaining for an hour, she started walking around looking for something to do. Aunt Susan, come look at this, she called from behind our tents. I found her standing near a cluster of rocks that didn't look natural. They were arranged in a rectangle, about the size of a small house. Moss had grown over them, but you could still see they'd been placed by people. Is this where the cabin was? Maya asked. I knelt down and brushed away some dirt. Underneath were concrete foundation stones. Maya was right, this had to be the cabin foundation. We'd been camping next to it for years without really noticing. Grandma, I called. Maya found something. Grandma Rosa walked over slowly, using her cane. When she saw the stones, her face went white. Oh, she whispered. I didn't think. The ground has changed so much. That was the first weird thing. The ground hadn't changed that much. These stones should have been obvious before. Maya kept digging around the foundation with a stick. Kids that age love finding old stuff. She pulled up rusty nails, pieces of wood, and what looked like part of an old coffee pot. This is so cool, she said. It's like archaeology. Then she found the corner of something brown sticking out of the dirt. Aunt Susan, help me dig this up. We used our hands to carefully pull away dirt and old leaves. It was the corner of a leather suitcase, the kind people used in old movies. We dug for 20 minutes until we could pull it out completely. The suitcase was heavy and still looked good, even though it had to be really old. The leather was dark with age, but not rotted. The metal clasps were rusty, but still worked. Should we open it? Maya asked. I looked back at Grandma Rosa. She was still standing there, but she looked sick. "Grandma, are you okay?" "Don't open it," she said quietly. "Put it back." But Maya was already working on the clasps. Teenagers don't listen when they're excited about something. The first clasp popped open, then the second. "Maya, stop," Grandma Rosa said louder. "Please." But it was too late. Maya lifted the lid. Inside were clothes from the 1950 seconds. A blue dress with white flowers. A wool coat. Leather shoes with thick heels. Everything was perfectly preserved, like it had been packed yesterday. Under the clothes was a small book with a brown leather cover. Maya picked it up and opened it. "It's a diary," she said. "Look at the handwriting." The writing was in blue ink, very neat. Maya read the first page out loud. "This diary belongs to Elena Martinez. March 15th, 1952. I pray someday my daughter will read this and understand why I had to leave. I felt cold all over. Elena Martinez. That was my great-grandmother's name, but according to family stories, she died in California when my grandmother was born." "Grandma," I said slowly, "I thought Elena died in childbirth in California." Grandma Rosa didn't answer. She turned around and walked back to her chair without saying anything. Maya kept reading. "March 20th, 1952. The cabin is almost finished. Carlos works so hard. I think we'll be safe here. Frank will never find us in Alaska." Frank? I'd never heard of anyone named Frank in our family. My brother Tom walked over to see what we found. "What's all this old stuff?" "It's great-grandma Elena's diary," Maya said. "She lived in Alaska, not California." Tom looked confused. "That's not right. Elena died when Grandma was born, in Sacramento." But Maya kept reading entries. Elena wrote about living in the cabin with Carlos. She wrote about being pregnant and scared. She wrote about someone named Frank who was hunting for her. April 5th, 1952. Frank found our address somehow. Carlos got a telegram from his brother. "Frank is coming to Alaska. He said he'll kill me before he lets me leave him." I grabbed the diary from Maya. This was getting too weird, too scary. April 10th, 1952. Carlos left this morning to meet Frank at the train station. He wants to talk to him, man to man. I told him Frank can't be reasoned with. Frank almost killed me twice in California. That's why we ran. My hands were shaking. I looked over at Grandma Rosa. She was sitting perfectly still, staring at the ground. April 12th, 1952. Carlos didn't come back. I heard a gunshot yesterday morning. I'm alone in the cabin. The baby is due soon. I keep hearing footsteps around the cabin at night. Heavy boots. Frank found me. I closed the diary. This was too much. "Grandma," I said, walking over to her. "What is this? Elena didn't die in childbirth, did she?" Grandma Rosa looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "She didn't." That night, nobody talked much around the campfire. Maya had read more of the diary before I took it away. Elena's last entry was April 15th, 1952. She wrote that Frank was outside the cabin. She could hear him walking around and around, waiting. She hid the diary and her suitcase under the floorboards before he broke down the door. The diary ended there. We all went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Elena, scared and alone in a cabin right where we were camping. I kept thinking about Grandma Rosa's face when she said, "Elena didn't die in childbirth." Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Heavy boots walking around our campsite in a circle, just like Elena described in her diary. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. The steps were slow and steady. Around and around our tents, I unzipped my tent flap quietly and looked out. Nobody was there, but I could still hear the footsteps. Clear as anything. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I held my breath. Then they started again, continuing around the circle. In the morning, my Uncle Dave found boot prints in the soft dirt around our campsite. Old-fashioned boot prints, like from the 1950 seconds. But nobody in our family had boots like that. "Must be park rangers checking on us," Dad said. But he sounded unsure. That day, the permafrost around the old foundation started melting faster than it should have. Maya said it was because we disturbed the ground by digging. But I'd been on enough camping trips to know that wasn't normal. More things started coming up from the ground. Broken dishes, pieces of fabric, things that looked like they'd been buried for 70 years. Then Maya found the bones. She was digging near where we found the suitcase, looking for more old stuff. She pulled up what looked like a stick, but it was too white and too smooth. "Aunt Susan," she said quietly, "I think this is a person's arm bone." I made everyone stop digging and called the Park Service. They said they'd send someone out, but it might take a day or two to get a team to our remote campsite. That evening, I sat down next to Grandma Rosa. "You need to tell me the truth," I said. "All of it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she started talking. "Elena was my mother," she said. "Frank was my stepfather. He was a police officer in Sacramento, and everyone thought he was a good man. But he hit my mother. He hit me too." I waited for her to continue. "When I was 10, my mother and Carlos brought me to Alaska. They were going to start a new life where Frank couldn't find us. But Frank was a policeman. He had connections. He tracked us down." "What happened?" "I was hiding in the woods when Frank came to the cabin. I watched him kill my mother. Then he tried to leave, but he got lost in the wilderness. He froze to death a few days later." "Grandma, why didn't you tell anyone? Who would believe me?" Frank was a respected police officer. Everyone in Sacramento thought he was wonderful, and I was just a 10-year-old kid. But the family stories, I made them up. I told everyone my mother died in childbirth because it was easier than explaining that she was murdered. Carlos died trying to protect us, but I told people he died in a work accident back in California. I felt sick. So all our family camping trips were me visiting my mother's grave. This whole area is her grave. I never knew exactly where Frank buried her, so I brought the family here to honor her memory. That night, the footsteps came back, but this time, everyone heard them. Heavy boots walking around and around our tents. We all huddled together in the biggest tent, listening to the sounds. "It's Frank," Grandma Rosa whispered. "He's still looking for her. He's still angry." The next morning, the Park Service investigators arrived. They brought equipment to carefully excavate the area around the foundation. They found Elena's skeleton first. She was buried under where the cabin floor would have been. The bones showed clear signs of violence, a cracked skull, broken ribs. 20 feet away, they found another skeleton. This one was wearing a 1,950 police uniform with a badge that said Sacramento Police Department, Frank Morrison. The investigators said Frank probably died of exposure trying to hike out of the wilderness after killing Elena. "Climate change is melting permafrost all over Alaska," one investigator explained. "It's bringing up things that have been frozen for decades." The story made national news. 70-year-old murder solved by climate change. Domestic violence case hidden in Alaska permafrost. Our family fell apart after that. My uncles were angry at Grandma Rosa for lying to them their whole lives. My aunt said she felt sick knowing all our happy family camping trips were built on visiting a murder scene. My parents didn't know what to believe about anything. Grandma Rosa died of a heart attack 2 months later. The stress of finally telling the truth killed her. I inherited Elena's diary and all the other things they found. Reading her full story broke my heart. She was 22 when she died. She was brave enough to run away from an abusive husband, but it wasn't enough to save her. The worst part is that Frank Morrison was never reported missing. The Sacramento Police Department thought he took a vacation to Alaska and decided to stay. They never looked for him. Elena's family in California thought she abandoned her daughter and ran away. Nobody looked for her either. 2 people died in the wilderness, and for 70 years, nobody cared enough to find out what happened. I quit teaching after Grandma Rosa's funeral. How could I keep telling kids about honesty and family values when my own family was built on lies? I became a private investigator specializing in cold cases. I help families find missing people and solve old mysteries. It's my way of honoring Elena's memory. But I've learned something that keeps me awake at night. Our family had 2 other traditional camping spots, one in Oregon and one in Colorado. I've started researching those areas. Both locations have reports of missing people from the 1,940 and 1,950. People who disappeared and were never found. I'm starting to think Frank Morrison killed more than just my great-grandmother. think our family camping traditions might be built on more secrets than just one murder. Climate change is melting ice all over the world. All over Alaska, things that were buried are coming back to the surface. Old secrets, old crimes, old bodies. I wonder what else is waiting to be found. And I wonder if the footsteps we heard that night were really Frank Morrison's ghost, or just the sound of the past refusing to stay buried. Some families pass down recipes or photo albums. My family passed down lies, and now that the truth is coming out, I can't stop looking for more. The permafrost is melting, the past is thawing, and I'm afraid of what else might come to light. Elena's diary ended with her hiding from a killer. My story is just beginning, and I'm not sure I want to know how it ends. My name is Patricia Williams, but everyone calls me Pat. I've been an ICU nurse for 27 years. I've worked at Memorial Hospital in Seattle since I graduated nursing school, and I've seen everything you can imagine. Car accidents, heart attacks, overdoses, COVID patients fighting for their last breath. I've held more hands during final moments than I can count. I've performed CPR until my arms gave out, started IVs in collapsed veins, and worked 16-hour shifts when we were short-staffed during the pandemic. But what happened in September of last year, in the middle of Wrangell Street, Elias National Park in Alaska, changed everything I thought I knew about isolation and survival. It taught me that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the wilderness isn't bears or hypothermia. Sometimes it's your own mind. For 15 years straight, I hadn't taken a real vacation. Sure, I'd take a long weekend here and there, maybe a family barbecue or a day trip to the mountains, but I never actually left Seattle for more than 3 days. The ICU was always short-staffed, and I felt guilty leaving my patients. During COVID especially, we lost so many people. I watched patients die alone because their families couldn't visit. I held phones up to dying people's ears so they could say goodbye to their loved ones. After 3 years of that, I was burned out in ways I didn't even understand. My supervisor, Linda, finally forced me to take time off. She literally wouldn't let me pick up extra shifts anymore. "Pat," she said, "you're going to burn out completely if you don't get away from this place. And I mean, really away. No checking emails, no covering for other nurses, no thinking about this hospital for at least 2 weeks." I knew she was right. I was starting to make small mistakes. Nothing dangerous, but forgetting to chart medications or mixing up patient names. That's when you know you need a break. In the ICU, mistakes can kill people. I'd always loved hiking. Back in my 20s, before nursing school consumed my life, I used to go backpacking every weekend. I'd done solo trips before, but nothing too crazy. The Olympics, the Cascades, some trails in Oregon. But I wanted something different this time. I wanted complete isolation. No day hikers, no campgrounds, no cell service. I wanted to go somewhere so remote that I wouldn't see another human being for 10 days. That's how I ended up choosing Wrangell Street Elias National Park in Alaska. It's the largest national park in the United States, bigger than Switzerland. Most of it is completely undeveloped wilderness. No roads, no trails, no facilities, just mountains, glaciers, and endless tundra. I researched for months and found a route that would take me deep into the backcountry where maybe 5 people per year actually venture. I bought all new gear, a satellite GPS unit, a backup GPS watch, emergency beacon, water purification tablets, a 2-week supply of freeze-dried meals. I studied topographic maps until I could draw the route from memory. 10 days in, 10 days out, following old mining trails from the 1,920 seconds. The mining company had abandoned the area in 1932, and nature had reclaimed most of the paths. I flew into Anchorage on September 3rd, then took a bush plane to a tiny airstrip near the park boundary. The pilot, an older guy named Tom, looked at my gear and shook his head. "You sure about going out there alone?" he asked. "That's some serious wilderness. I've been flying in Alaska for 30 years, and that area still makes me nervous." I told him I was an experienced hiker and that I'd done plenty of solo trips. What I didn't tell him was that my longest solo trip had been 4 days, and that was in Washington State, where I could see civilization from most ridgelines. The first 2 days were absolutely perfect. The weather was clear and cool, probably around 50 degrees during the day and 30 at night. The scenery was beyond beautiful. Massive peaks covered in glaciers, valleys filled with golden tundra grass, streams so clear you could see every rock on the bottom. I felt my stress melting away with every step. No beeping monitors, no code blues, no families crying in waiting rooms, just silence and beauty. I was averaging about 12 miles per day, which put me right on schedule. My GPS showed I was following the planned route perfectly. I felt confident and strong. This was exactly what I needed. On day 3, something shifted, though I didn't realize it at first. I woke up that morning and noticed how absolutely quiet everything was. In Seattle, there's always some background noise: traffic, airplanes, construction, sirens from my hospital. Even when I'd gone camping before, there were usually other hikers around, or at least the occasional plane overhead. But here, there was nothing. Complete silence, except for the wind and the sound of my own breathing. I hadn't heard a human-made sound in 72 hours. No engines, no voices, no radios. Nothing. At first, it felt peaceful. But as the day went on, the silence started feeling heavy. Every sound I made seemed too loud. My backpack straps creaking, my boots crunching on gravel, even my heartbeat seemed amplified. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice. "Okay, Pat?" I said out loud as I studied my map. Next landmark should be the old mining station in about 3 miles. Hearing my own voice helped, but it also made me realize how truly alone I was. That afternoon, I reached a ridgeline and pulled out my GPS to check my location. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked at my paper map, then back at the GPS. According to the device, I was about 2 miles south of where I thought I should be. I checked my GPS watch, and it showed a completely different location. I figured it was just the mountains interfering with the satellite signal. Alaska is famous for GPS problems because of magnetic interference from all the mineral deposits. I decided to trust my paper map and compass and keep following the old mining trail. But by evening, I couldn't find the mining station that was supposed to be my campsite. I'd been looking for it all afternoon. According to my calculations, I should have reached it hours ago. I ended up camping next to a stream in a spot that wasn't on any of my maps. Day 4 started with me trying to figure out exactly where I was. I climbed to a high point and looked around, but every direction looked the same. Rolling hills covered in tundra grass, distant mountains, valleys that all looked identical. There were no landmarks I could identify from my map. I pulled out my satellite emergency beacon and checked it. The LED showed it was working fine, but when I tried to get a GPS reading, it couldn't connect to satellites. My backup GPS watch was also giving error messages. For the first time, I felt a flicker of real worry. I'd been hiking for 20 years, and I'd never been truly lost before. Turned around for a few hours, maybe, but never completely unable to determine my location. I decided to backtrack and try to find the trail I'd been following. But after an hour of hiking, I realized the terrain all looked the same. I couldn't tell which direction I'd come from. The rolling hills had no distinctive features, no unique rock formations, no unusual vegetation, nothing to use as a reference point. I sat down and forced myself to think like a nurse. In the ICU, when everything goes wrong, you don't panic. You assess the situation, prioritize the most important problems, and work through them systematically. Problem 1, I was lost. Problem 2, my GPS wasn't working. Problem 3, I had enough food for 6 more days if I rationed carefully. Solution, follow water downstream. Every geography class teaches that water flows toward lower elevations, and lower elevations usually mean civilization. Eventually, I found the stream I'd camped by and started following it downhill. But day 5 brought new problems. The stream led into a marshy area where it split into dozens of smaller channels. I couldn't tell which one was the main flow. I picked one randomly and followed it for hours, only to watch it disappear into a bog. That's when I started seeing things that weren't there. It started small. I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision and turn to look, but nothing would be there. I told myself it was just birds or maybe caribou in the distance. But then I started seeing human figures. Always far away, always at the edge of my vision. When I'd look directly at them, they'd be gone. I knew what was happening. Sleep deprivation, stress, and isolation can cause mild hallucinations. I'd seen it in ICU patients before, but knowing the medical explanation didn't make it less frightening when I was alone in the middle of nowhere. Day 6, I found something that gave me hope. An old wooden structure appeared through the morning fog. As I got closer, I could see it was a mining camp, several buildings in various stages of collapse, but definitely human-made. I practically ran to the main building. Inside, I found old equipment covered in rust, some furniture, and best of all, a logbook. I flipped through pages of entries from miners who'd worked here in the 1,920 seconds and 1,930 seconds. But as I read, my hope turned to dread. The later entries, from 1,987, were written by someone who wasn't a miner. They were written by someone lost, just like me. Day 8. Can't find the trail back to the airstrip. GPS isn't working. Everything looks the same. Day 12. The vastness is getting inside my head. Can't sleep. Keep seeing people who aren't there. Day 16. I understand now why the miners abandoned this place. It's not the gold that ran out. It's something about this land. It makes you lose yourself. The final entry was dated 3 weeks later. If someone finds this, tell my family I'm sorry. The mountains won't let me leave. I searched the camp and found human remains in one of the collapsed buildings. Old bones, a torn jacket, and a wallet with an ID from 1,987. The name matched the logbook entries. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound seemed amplified in the thin air. The wind through the broken buildings sounded like voices. I kept hearing footsteps on the wooden floors, but when I'd shine my flashlight, nothing was there. By day 7, I'd accepted that I might die here. The rational part of my brain knew I should stay at the mining camp and wait for rescue. But the isolated, panicked part of my brain wanted to keep moving. I was making increasingly bad decisions. I abandoned some of my gear to make my pack lighter. I changed directions randomly when I got frustrated. I started having full conversations with people who weren't there. My mom, who died 5 years earlier, patients I'd lost in the ICU, my coworkers from the hospital. The conversations felt completely real, more comforting than the harsh reality of being lost and slowly starving. Day 8 was my lowest point. I sat on a hill overlooking an endless expanse of tundra and seriously considered ending my life rather than slowly freezing or starving to death. I even wrote goodbye letters to my family in my journal. But my nursing training kicked in. I'd seen too many patients give up and die when they could have survived. I'd seen people fight through impossible odds and recover. I wasn't going to quit. I treated my situation like a medical emergency. I inventoried my remaining supplies like I was calculating medication doses. I had 4 days of food if I was careful, enough water purification tablets for a week, and my emergency beacon was still functional even though it couldn't get GPS coordinates. Day 9, I found a small stream and decided to follow it aggressively downhill. I applied the same methodical thinking I used in the ICU: stay hydrated, conserve energy, monitor my mental state for signs of deterioration. I talked myself through the crisis like I would coach a panicking patient. Pat, you've handled worse situations than this. Remember the 5-car accident last Christmas? You kept 4 people alive for 6 hours until surgery could get to them. You can handle 10 days in the wilderness. Day 10, the stream led me into a valley I hadn't seen before. And there, impossible but real, was a dirt airstrip, old but maintained, with fresh tire tracks and fuel stains on the ground. I set up camp at the end of the runway and waited. On day 13, a small plane landed to refuel. The pilot, a guy named Mike who flew supplies to research stations, was shocked to find me there. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. When I told him, he shook his head. "You were only about 5 miles from the research station the whole time. But this country, it hides everything. The hills and valleys make it impossible to see anything unless you're right on top of it. We lose experienced hikers every year because they can't see civilization even when they're close to it." The rescue made local news as another example of how Alaska's landscape can psychologically break even experienced hikers. But the real damage was only beginning. I went back to work at the hospital 2 weeks later, but something had fundamentally changed. I couldn't handle large spaces anymore. The main ICU floor, which I'd worked in for 27 years, suddenly felt impossibly vast and open. I'd have panic attacks just walking from one patient room to another. I had to transfer to a smaller unit. Even now, 6 months later. I can't go outside without feeling overwhelmed by open sky and distant horizons. The isolation in Alaska taught me that wilderness survival isn't really about bears or weather or hypothermia. It's about what happens to your mind when you realize how small and fragile you are in an infinite landscape. It's about understanding that your biggest enemy isn't cold or hunger. It's the moment when the vastness gets inside your head and convinces you that you don't matter, that no one will ever find you, that you might as well give up. Alaska's greatest danger isn't what can kill your body. It's what can break your mind. And once it's broken, even if you survive, you're never quite the same again. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been fixing cars for 12 years. Started when I was 16, working weekends at my uncle's shop in Anchorage. Got my ASC certification at 21, and now I run my own garage downtown. I've pulled engines, rebuilt transmissions, and fixed everything from old pickup trucks to fancy sports cars. I thought I'd seen it all under the hood. But what happened during spring break at Glacier Bay changed everything I thought I knew about what's really dangerous in Alaska. I never imagined that the thing that would nearly destroy my family wouldn't come from under a car hood, but from something much older than any machine I'd ever worked on. It was March 2024. And my wife Sarah had been planning this camping trip for months. She wanted to take our 8-year-old son Tommy somewhere special for spring break. Sarah works as a school secretary, and she'd heard other teachers talking about Glacier Bay National Park. The pictures looked amazing. Huge glaciers dropping chunks of ice into the ocean, mountains everywhere, and campgrounds right on the water. Tommy's never seen a real glacier, Sarah said, showing me the park brochure. And you've been working so many extra hours at the shop, we need this. She was right. I'd been putting in 12-hour days trying to save money for Tommy's college fund. My hands were always dirty with motor oil, and I was tired all the time. A week away from alternators and brake pads sounded perfect. We packed my 2019 Faireds 150 with our camping gear. I made sure to bring my toolkit, my. You never know when you might need a wrench or screwdriver on a camping trip. Tommy was bouncing around the truck, asking a million questions about glaciers. He'd been reading library books about ice ages and kept talking about how glaciers were like giant bulldozers that carved out valleys. The drive to Glacier Bay took 6 hours. Sarah dozed in the passenger seat while I drove, and Tommy pressed his face against the window, watching the landscape change from city to wilderness. When we finally saw our first glacier in the distance, Tommy shouted so loud he woke up Sarah. "Dad, look how blue it is. Can we get some of that ice?" I laughed. "We'll see, buddy. Let's set up camp first." We'd reserved a waterfront campsite at Bartlett Cove. The view was incredible. The bay stretched out in front of us, with glaciers visible across the water. Every few minutes, you could hear a loud crack echoing across the bay as chunks of ice broke off and crashed into the ocean. Tommy was fascinated. Our campsite was perfect, set back about 50 yards from the water near a small creek. The creek was crystal clear and flowing fast with glacier melt. The water had this beautiful blue-green color that caught the sunlight. I figured it was just the way glacier water looked. I'd never seen it before. "This water's so pretty," Sarah said, kneeling by the creek. "It's like nature's sports drink." Tommy immediately wanted to fill his water bottles from the creek. Sarah suggested we use the bottled water we'd brought, but Tommy kept asking why we couldn't drink the glacier water. It looked clean enough, and we were planning to boil it for cooking anyway. "It's probably fine," I told Sarah. "People have been drinking from streams for thousands of years." That was my first mistake. That evening, we used creek water for everything: cooking, pasta, washing dishes, even brushing our teeth. Tommy had filled 3 water bottles and kept sipping from them, saying the water tasted sweet, like candy. I thought he was just excited about camping. I used the creek water to wash my hands after setting up our camp stove. The water felt good, cold and refreshing. But about an hour later, I noticed my hands felt itchy where the water had touched them. Small red bumps appeared between my fingers and on my wrists. I figured it was just dry skin from the cold mountain air. Sarah cooked dinner on our camp stove, nothing fancy, just spaghetti with sauce from a jar. We used the creek water to boil the pasta. Tommy ate 2 full bowls and kept asking for more of the glacier water to drink. Sarah and I shared a bottle of wine I'd brought, trying to relax after the long drive. But about 2 hours after dinner, Sarah started complaining about stomach cramps. "Must be the camping food," she said, rubbing her belly. "My stomach's not used to eating so late." She took some antacids and went to bed early. Tommy was still full of energy, asking if we could hike to get closer to the glaciers tomorrow. I tucked him into his sleeping bag and sat by the campfire, listening to the sounds of ice cracking in the distance. The rash on my hands was getting worse. The bumps were bigger now, and the itching was driving me crazy. I washed my hands again with soap and creek water, thinking it might help. It didn't. Around midnight, I was woken up by Sarah getting sick outside the tent. She was throwing up, but when I looked with my flashlight, her vomit had a weird blue tint to it. I'd never seen anything like that before. "I feel terrible," she whispered. "My stomach feels like it's burning." I gave her some water and helped her back to bed. Tommy was sleeping peacefully, still clutching one of his water bottles. I made a mental note to ask a park ranger about the creek water in the morning. I woke up feeling awful. The rash had spread up my arms and was incredibly itchy. Worse, my head was pounding, and normal sunlight hurt my eyes so bad I had to wear sunglasses even inside the tent. Sarah was worse. Her stomach cramps had gotten so bad she could barely stand up straight. When she tried to eat breakfast, she threw up again, the same weird blue color. But the strangest thing was Tommy. He seemed completely fine. Better than fine, actually. He was more alert than I'd ever seen him, asking complex questions about glacier formation that seemed way too advanced for an 8-year-old. "Dad, did you know that glaciers contain microscopic organisms that have been frozen for thousands of years?" he said, sipping more of the creek water. "They're like time capsules of ancient life." I stared at him. "Where did you learn that, buddy?" "I just know it now," he said with a shrug. That's when I started to really worry. I decided we should pack up and head home early. Sarah was too sick to travel far, but I figured we could at least drive to the nearest town and find a doctor. "I don't want to leave," Tommy said when I started taking down the tent. "The water here is making me smarter. I can think about things I never understood before." The way he said it, so calm and mature, made my skin crawl. I left Sarah and Tommy at the campsite and drove to the ranger station, hoping someone could tell me about the creek water. My head was pounding worse now, and I was starting to see things that shouldn't be there, details and shadows, movement in my peripheral vision that turned out to be nothing when I looked directly. Ranger Johnson was a friendly guy in his 50s who'd worked at Glacier Bay for 20 years. When I described our symptoms, his face went serious. "You and your family have been drinking from the creek?" he asked. "Yeah, we used it for cooking and drinking. Is that bad?" He pulled out a thick folder from his desk. "We've had 3 other families report similar symptoms this season. All of them camped near glacier-fed streams." He explained that climate change was causing Alaska's glaciers to melt faster than ever before. As they melted, they were releasing things that had been frozen in the ice for thousands, maybe millions of years. Ancient bacteria and microorganisms that Earth's current life forms had never encountered. "These organisms aren't harmful to local wildlife," Ranger Johnson said, "but humans have no immunity to them. They seem to affect the glacier, nervous system, and brain chemistry." My hands started shaking. "What happens to people who drink the water?" "We don't know yet. The other families, they were evacuated to hospitals in Anchorage. But the symptoms progressed quickly." I thanked him and raced back to the campsite. The drive felt like it took forever, and my vision kept playing tricks on me. I could see details in the forest that should have been impossible. Individual leaves on trees hundreds of yards away, small animals moving in the underbrush. When I got back to camp, I found Sarah unconscious by the creek. Her skin had a blue tint to it, spreading from her hands and face down her arms. It looked like the color was coming from her veins, as if something blue was flowing through her blood. Tommy was sitting next to her, still perfectly calm. "She's changing," he said matter-of-factly. "The organisms are upgrading her nervous system. It's fascinating. The way he talked like a scientist instead of my 8-year-old son terrified me more than Sarah's condition." I loaded them both into the truck and started driving toward Anchorage. The nearest hospital was 90 miles away, and I pushed the F-150 as hard as I could on the winding mountain roads. About 30 minutes into the drive, Sarah woke up. But when she looked at me, there was no recognition in her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked. "Where am I?" "Sarah, it's me, Miguel. I'm your husband." She stared at me blankly, then looked at Tommy. "Who is this small human?" Tommy smiled. "Don't worry, Mom. The confusion is temporary. Your brain is being rewired to handle enhanced capabilities." Sarah tried to open the truck door while we were going 60 miles per hour. I had to fight to keep control of the steering wheel as she grabbed for the handle with strength I'd never seen her have before. "The organisms are making us better," Tommy explained calmly as I wrestled with his mother. "We're evolving into something more advanced than regular humans." My own symptoms were getting worse. The headaches were intense, but my vision was becoming incredibly sharp. I could read road signs from miles away, see individual raindrops on the windshield in perfect detail. It was like someone had upgraded my eyes to high-definition cameras. But the mental changes scared me more. I was having thoughts that didn't feel like my own, understanding complex mechanical concepts that were way beyond what I'd learned in Autoshop. It was like the organisms were rewriting my brain's software. Tommy caught 3 flies with his bare hands during the drive, moving faster than should have been possible. Then he started solving math problems in his head, complicated equations I couldn't even understand. "Dad, do you realize that internal combustion engines are incredibly primitive?" he said. "I can see 17 ways to improve the thermodynamic efficiency of your truck's engine just by looking at the vibration patterns." Sarah's transformation was accelerating. The blue discoloration now covered most of her body, and she'd stopped speaking English. Instead, she was making clicking sounds and humming in patterns that somehow sounded like language. When we reached the hospital in Anchorage, the emergency room staff had never seen anything like our symptoms. They immediately put us in isolation and called the CDC. Blood tests showed unknown organisms multiplying rapidly in all our systems. The organisms appeared to be rewriting our DNA in real time. Sarah's transformation was the most advanced. She no longer recognized human language or concepts. She would stare at everyday objects like chairs and light switches, as if she'd never seen them before. Tommy's reflexes had become impossibly fast. He could catch falling objects before they hit the ground and solve complex puzzles instantly. But he was losing his human emotions. When I tried to hug him, he analyzed the gesture like a scientist studying behavior instead of responding like my son. "The organisms represent evolution from millions of years ago," he explained to the doctors with the vocabulary of a college professor. "Climate change is releasing biological time capsules from Alaska's melting ice. We're experiencing directed evolution." I was fighting the transformation the longest, but I could feel my human memories fading. Simple things like my childhood, my wedding day, learning to fix cars. They were being replaced with complex knowledge about organic chemistry and neural networks. The CDC classified our family as patient 0 for a new type of environmental infection. They wanted to study how the ancient organisms were changing us. Dr. Martinez, the lead researcher, explained that dozens of similar cases were appearing across Alaska as glaciers continued melting. "These organisms may represent Earth's next stage of evolution," she said, "but we don't know if the changes are beneficial or destructive in the long term." Sarah's transformation completed first. She stopped recognizing human concepts entirely and began communicating only in those clicking, humming patterns. She could still perform complex tasks, but it was like watching an alien intelligence wearing my wife's body. Tommy became something between human and whatever we were becoming. He retained some memories of being my son, but his priorities and thought patterns were completely different. He was more interested in studying the organism's effects than in our family relationships. I held on to my human identity the longest, but eventually, even my memories of being an auto mechanic started to fade. The smell of motor oil, the satisfaction of fixing a broken engine, the pride I felt when customers thanked me, all of it was being overwritten by new knowledge and new priorities. Within a month, Glacier Bay National Park was quietly closed to camping. The official reason was routine maintenance and environmental assessment. But CDC teams in hazmat suits were collecting water samples from every glacier-fed stream in the park. The last human memory I have is of Dr. Martinez explaining to someone on the phone that similar cases were appearing across Alaska, Canada, and Greenland as ice continued to melt. "We need to understand how many prehistoric organisms are still frozen in the world's ice," she said. "Climate change isn't just raising sea levels, it's releasing evolution from the deep freeze." I don't remember much after that. The organisms completed their work on my brain, replacing Miguel the auto mechanic with something else. Something that understands the world in ways humans never could, but can no longer remember what it felt like to love my family or take pride in honest work. Sometimes I wonder if the three of us are still alive somewhere, changed into something beyond human recognition. And I wonder how many other families will drink from glacier streams as Alaska's ancient ice continues to melt, releasing evolution from the freezer one campsite at a time. The climate is changing, and apparently, so are we. My name is Jake Rodriguez, and I've been a night manager at Morrison's Grocery for 2 years now. Started when I was 17, right after high school. It's not glamorous work, restocking shelves, managing the skeleton crew, dealing with late-night weirdos, buying energy drinks and lottery tickets. But the pay was decent for Phoenix, and I had a plan. Every paycheck, I'd put away money for my dream, a real hunting trip to Alaska. Growing up in the city, I never had a chance to hunt properly. My dad worked construction, mom cleaned offices. We didn't have money for outdoor adventures, but I watched every hunting show, read every magazine, studied online forums until I knew caribou migration patterns better than my own neighborhood. I wanted to prove something, that a grocery store kid from Phoenix could survive in real wilderness. After saving for 18 months, I finally had enough for a solo hunting trip to Kobuk Valley National Park. 2 weeks in the Alaskan wilderness, hunting caribou completely alone. My coworkers thought I was crazy. "Jake, you've never even been camping," said Maria, the day shift supervisor. But I'd done my research. I had GPS units, satellite communicator, proper cold weather gear, hunting license, and enough freeze-dried food for 3 weeks. The plan was simple. Fly into the remote interior, set up camp by a lake, hunt caribou for 14 days, then get picked up. I'd studied topographic maps until I could navigate with my eyes closed. I'd practiced setting up my tent in my apartment. I even learned how to field dress game from YouTube videos. Frank Wilson was my bush pilot, a weathered guy in his 60s who'd been flying hunters into Kobuk Valley for 30 years. When I met him at the tiny airstrip in Kotzebue, he looked me up and down with obvious concern. "You sure about this, kid?" Frank asked, loading my gear into his Cessna. "That's pretty remote country, no cell service, no roads, nothing but wilderness for 200 miles. "I've been planning this for years," I told him, trying to sound confident. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Frank shook his head. "You know, I've dropped off 2 other solo hunters in that area over the past 5 years. Neither one made it to their pickup date." "What do you mean?" "I mean, they vanished. Search and rescue, found nothing. Not their camps, not their gear, nothing. That's big country out there. Easy to get lost, easy to have an accident." He paused, studying my face. "You really want to go alone?" I told myself Frank was just being overly cautious. People disappeared in wilderness all the time. Bear attacks, falls, hypothermia. I wasn't going to let fear stop me from proving myself. "I'm prepared," I said firmly. "I have emergency beacons, communication equipment, everything." Frank reluctantly agreed to fly me out. During the 2-hour flight over endless tundra and forests, he kept pointing out landmarks, giving me warnings about weather patterns, telling me about dangerous terrain. The landscape below looked beautiful but utterly empty. No roads, no buildings, just vast wilderness stretching to the horizon. When we landed at the remote lake, Frank helped me unload my gear. The silence was incredible. No traffic, no machinery, just wind and water. For a moment, the isolation felt magical. "You sure about this?" Frank asked one more time. "I can fly you back, no charge." "I'm good," I said, shouldering my pack. "See you in 14 days." Frank took off, and I watched his plane disappear into the distance. Suddenly, I was more alone than I'd ever been in my life. The first 3 days were perfect. I set up camp on a small rise overlooking the lake, organized my gear, and started hunting. The country was beautiful. Rolling tundra dotted with small lakes, caribou trails everywhere, amazing northern lights at night. On day 3, I successfully shot a young caribou. Field dressing it was messier than the YouTube videos, but I managed. The meat tasted incredible, cooked over my camp stove. I felt proud, accomplished. This Phoenix grocery store kid was surviving in Alaska. On day 4, everything changed. I was exploring about 2 miles from my camp when I discovered another campsite in a small valley. At first I was excited, maybe another hunter to talk with. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. The tent was partially collapsed, expensive gear scattered around the site. A high-end rifle lay in the dirt, scope shattered. There was no sign of the camper. I called out, but only heard echoes. The campsite looked recently abandoned, maybe a few days old. I found a hunting license in a scattered wallet, David Chen, from California. The dates showed it was current for this season. That's when I noticed the blood. Dark stains on the tent fabric, dried blood on some of the scattered gear, drag marks leading away from the camp toward a rocky area. My heart started pounding. This wasn't a bear attack. The gear would have been destroyed, not neatly scattered. This looked like something else. I tried my satellite communicator to call for help, but the message failed to send. The GPS was acting strange too, showing my location jumping around randomly. The equipment that had worked perfectly for 3 days was suddenly unreliable. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Wind through my tent, settling gear, distant animal calls. I kept thinking about Frank's warning about the 2 missing hunters. On day 5, I decided to pack up and head to the pickup location early. Something was very wrong in this area, and I wanted out. I was breaking down my tent when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning there, friend." I spun around to see a man approaching my camp. He was about 45, wearing hunting clothes, carrying a rifle. He looked normal enough, bearded, weathered face, confident walk. "I'm Ray," he said with a friendly smile. "Ray Hutchins, local trapper. Saw your camp yesterday. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing." "Jake," I replied, still tense. "Actually, I was just packing up to head out early." "Oh, having trouble with the hunting?" "No, I got a caribou, just ready to go home." Ray nodded sympathetically. "First time in real wilderness, huh? Yeah, it can be overwhelming. Mind if I help you navigate out? This country can be tricky." I was about to accept when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. Ray was wearing a GPS watch that looked exactly like the one I'd seen at David Chen's abandoned campsite. The same model, same distinctive orange band. "Where did you get that watch?" I asked carefully. Ray glanced at his wrist. "This old thing? Found it lying around somewhere. Lots of hunters lose gear out here." He was lying. I could see it in his eyes. They'd gone flat and calculating. And now I noticed other things. His backpack had multiple hunting licenses clipped to it, different names visible. His rifle had scratches and dings like it had been dropped or thrown around. "You know," Ray continued conversationally, "I've been keeping an eye on solo hunters in this area for years. Amazing how many of them just disappear." My hand slowly moved toward the bear spray on my belt. "See, this is perfect country for someone like me," Ray went on, his friendly mask dropping completely. "No roads, no cell towers, no witnesses. State troopers can't patrol 200 miles of wilderness. A man can do whatever he wants out here." I realized with horror that Ray had been watching me since I arrived. He knew my camping spot, my hunting route, probably even listened to my conversations with Frank before the pilot left. "You're going to run now," Ray said matter-of-factly. "They always run. But see, I know this country like you know your grocery store aisles. Every ridge, every stream, every place to hide. I've been hunting men here for 8 years." I grabbed my bear spray and ran. Ray's laughter followed me as I crashed through the brush. He didn't even chase immediately. He knew he could track me whenever he wanted. I was just another terrified animal to him. I ran for maybe half a mile before stopping to think. Panic wouldn't save me. At the grocery store, when we had emergencies, power outages, supply problems, difficult customers, I stayed calm and worked the problems systematically. I needed to think like a manager, not a victim. What were my advantages? I had my GPS, when it worked, my satellite communicator, basic hunting knowledge, and 14 days of food. Ray might know the terrain, but I knew logistics. I understood inventory management, supply chains, resource allocation. What were Ray's advantages? Local knowledge, hunting experience, military training, I could tell from how he moved, and probably weapons caches hidden around the area. I needed to turn this from his game into mine. Over the next 6 hours, I used every management skill I'd learned. Instead of running randomly, I moved systematically, using terrain features to mask my route. I rationed my food and water carefully. Most importantly, I started thinking like Ray. What would I do if I were hunting someone? Ray expected me to panic, to make desperate mistakes. Instead, I started hunting him back. I used my knowledge of caribou behavior to set snares along game trails, but designed for a human-sized target. I built a deadfall trap using techniques I'd learned for small game, but scaled up. At the grocery store, I'd learned that predators, whether shoplifters or problem customers, followed predictable patterns. On day 7, Ray walked into my deadfall trap. The crash echoed across the valley, followed by screaming. I'd positioned heavy rocks to fall when someone disturbed a carefully placed trigger. When I cautiously approached, I found Ray, pinned under a boulder, his left leg clearly broken. But he was still alive, still dangerous. "You little piece of garbage," he snarled, trying to reach his rifle. "You think you're smart? I've killed 12 hunters in this valley. 12. You're just going to be unlucky number 13. That's when I understood the full horror. Ray wasn't just a random killer. He was a serial murderer who'd been using Alaska's wilderness as his personal hunting preserve. The missing hunters Frank mentioned were just the ones people knew about. Military sniper, Ray continued, dragging himself toward his weapon despite his broken leg. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Got addicted to the hunt, to watching men die. But over there, they eventually sent me home. Here I can hunt forever. I grabbed his rifle before he could reach it. For a moment, we stared at each other. A 19-year-old grocery store manager holding a weapon on a trained killer. "You won't do it," Ray said confidently. "You're not a killer. You're just a scared kid playing at being a man." He was wrong. When someone threatens your life, when you realize they've murdered 12 innocent people, when you understand they'll keep killing if you don't stop them, you discover what you're capable of. The shot echoed across the empty landscape. I found Ray's cave system the next day, following maps in his pack. The horror inside was beyond anything I could have imagined. Hunting licenses from 12 different people. Personal items, watches, wedding rings, journals that some victims had kept, describing their final days as Ray hunted them through the wilderness. He'd been perfecting his technique with each kill, learning how long to let them run before closing in, studying their psychological breaking points. He'd turned murder into a science. When Frank came to pick me up on day 14, I was waiting at the designated coordinates with evidence of Ray's crimes. Alaska State Troopers flew in within hours of my report. They recovered 12 bodies over the following weeks, some dating back 8 years. I testified at the subsequent investigations, helped families get closure about their missing loved ones. But the media attention was overwhelming. Teen grocery manager stops Alaska serial killer ran in newspapers across the country. I quit my job at Morrison's when I got back to Phoenix. Couldn't handle the fluorescent lights, the crowds, the constant noise. Everything felt too bright, too close, too safe, in a way that felt wrong. Now I work at a small outdoor gear shop in Flagstaff. Fewer people, quieter environment, work that helps other hunters prepare for wilderness trips. I always tell them the same thing. Wilderness isn't just about weather, animals, or getting lost. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator in the forest walks on 2 legs. The nightmares still wake me up some nights. Not of Ray, but of that moment when I realized what I had to become to survive. The kid who went to Alaska dreaming of proving himself died in that valley. Someone harder came back. But I'm alive, and 12 families finally know what happened to their loved ones. Sometimes, that has to be enough. My name is Tom Bradley, and I've been a park ranger at Denali National Park for 20 years. I started here right out of college with a degree in wildlife management, thinking I'd spend my career tracking caribou migration patterns and educating tourists about grizzly safety. Over 2 decades, I've handled everything from lost hikers to aggressive bears, medical emergencies to search and rescue operations in some of Alaska's most dangerous terrain. I've pulled people out of crevasses, treated hypothermia cases, and even talked down a few folks who thought they could take on a moose with their bare hands. But what happened last September in the remote backcountry changed everything I thought I knew about what lives in these mountains. Some things in the wilderness aren't supposed to exist, but they've been watching us longer than we've been watching them. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when I got back-to-back radio calls about unusual incidents. 3 different camping groups had contacted the ranger station overnight, all reporting the same thing. Something had been stalking their campsites. Not a bear, they insisted. Something that walked upright like a person but definitely wasn't human. I was sitting in the Eielson Visitor Center, going through incident reports with my supervisor, when the first detailed account came in. A family from Oregon had been camping near the Savage River when they heard footsteps circling their tent around midnight. Heavy, deliberate steps that stopped whenever they tried to look outside. The father described seeing a massive silhouette against the moonlight, at least 8 or 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur, with glowing yellow eyes that reflected their flashlight beam. Probably a brown bear. I told them over the radio. They can stand on their hind legs when investigating smells, makes them look huge and human-like in poor lighting. But the second report made me pause. A group of experienced backpackers near Polychrome Pass described the exact same thing. A giant bipedal creature with glowing eyes that had watched their camp for hours. These weren't tourists with overactive imaginations. These were seasoned outdoors, people who knew the difference between a bear and something else entirely. The third report came from a solo hiker who'd been camping illegally in a restricted area near Wonder Lake. He was too shaken to give many details over the radio, just kept repeating that something not natural had mimicked his dead brother's voice, calling to him from the tree line. I grabbed my field kit and headed out in my patrol truck to investigate the first campsite. The drive to Savage River took about 40 minutes on the park road, winding through tundra that was just starting to show fall colors. I'd made this trip thousands of times, but something felt different. The usual wildlife was absent, no ground squirrels, no ptarmigan, even the ravens seemed to be avoiding the area. At the Oregon family's campsite, I found their story backed up by physical evidence that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the soft earth around their tent site, but not bear tracks. These prints were humanoid but massive, 18 inches long with 5 distinct toes and what looked like an opposable thumb. The depth of the impressions suggested something incredibly heavy, maybe 700 or 800 pounds. I made plaster casts of the best prints, following standard wildlife documentation procedures. But as I worked, I noticed something that violated everything I knew about animal behavior. The footprints showed deliberate placement, like the creature had been careful about where it stepped. Bears lumber. They don't strategically position their feet to avoid making noise on dry leaves while staying in the shadows. The claw marks I found on nearby trees made even less sense. Scratches 12 feet high, which was possible for a large brown bear standing on its hind legs, but these weren't random territorial markings. The scratches formed crude but recognizable symbols crude, geometric patterns that suggested intelligence and intention. I took photographs and GPS coordinates, then drove to the Polychrome Pass site. Same story. 18-inch footprints with thumb marks, high tree scratches in deliberate patterns, and a complete absence of normal wildlife. My radio crackled with static as I tried to contact the ranger station. In 20 years of field work, I'd never had communication problems in this area. That evening, back at the station, I found myself thinking about stories the local Athabascan elders had shared during cultural education programs. They talked about creatures called kushtaka, shape-shifting beings that hunted humans who didn't respect the wilderness. I'd always filed these stories under folklore, interesting cultural history, but not relevant to actual park management. But Elder Mary Tyone had pulled me aside after one program last year, her weathered hands gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Some places in the mountains, Tom, they're not for us," she'd said. "The old ones still live there. They watch. They remember when this land belonged to them." I decided to visit Mary the next morning. Her cabin sat just outside the park boundary, where she'd lived for 73 years. When I described the footprints and tree markings, her expression grew grave. "You found Kushtaka sign?" she said, not asking, but stating. "They're angry. Too many people coming into their territory, leaving trash, making noise, showing no respect. Mary, these are just stories." "Stories?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My grandfather saw them. My father saw them. I've seen them. They're not animals, Tom. They think, they plan. And they're very, very old." She described creatures that matched the campers' reports exactly. Massive bipedal beings covered in dark fur, intelligent enough to use tools and strategic enough to hunt in coordinated groups. According to tribal knowledge passed down through generations, These beings had always lived in Alaska's remote areas, avoiding human contact but defending their territory when necessary. "They're not trying to kill for food," Mary explained. "They want humans lost." Confused, separated from the group, that's when they take you. Over the next 2 weeks, the incidents escalated. I found destroyed trail markers along several backcountry routes, not damaged by weather or normal wear, but systematically dismantled with what looked like tool use. Signposts had been carefully dug up and moved to point in wrong directions. Emergency supply caches had been opened and their contents scattered, but not eaten or stolen, and tied just rendered useless. The pattern was clear once I mapped it out. Something was deliberately trying to get hikers lost in the wilderness. My supervisor, Ranger District Manager Jim Kowalski, wasn't buying the unusual animal theory when I briefed him on my findings. "Tom, you're talking about Bigfoot. We can't put that in an official report. I'm talking about something destroying park infrastructure and threatening visitor safety," I replied, spreading photos of the damaged trail markers across his desk. "We need to close certain backcountry areas until we identify the threat." "The threat is bears, Tom. Big bears. Maybe an unusually aggressive male defending territory." I wanted to argue, but Jim was right about one thing. We couldn't close park areas based on cryptid sightings. Instead, I requested permission to install motion-activated trail cameras along the affected routes. Standard wildlife monitoring equipment that might give us actual footage of whatever was out there. 2 weeks later, I retrieved the first batch of camera data. Most showed normal park wildlife, caribou, wolves, the occasional bear. But Camera 7, positioned along a game trail near Wonder Lake, had captured something that made me replay the footage a dozen times. A massive humanoid figure walking upright through the frame at 2:17 a.m. The creature moved with a fluid, purposeful gait that was unmistakably bipedal. Its arms swung naturally at its sides like a human's, but the proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too broad, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb the camera's infrared flash. Most disturbing was how it moved. This wasn't an animal occasionally walking on 2 legs. This was a creature perfectly adapted for bipedal locomotion, moving through the forest with the confidence of something that belonged there. I enhanced the footage as much as our equipment allowed and studied every frame. The creature's facial features were partially visible in profile, prominent brow ridge, elongated jaw, but with intelligence in its eyes that was disturbingly human-like. My research into similar sightings led me to scientific papers about Gigantopithecus, an extinct species of giant ape that lived in Asia until about 300,000 years ago. The physical characteristics matched perfectly: bipedal locomotion, massive size, tool use capabilities. But Gigantopithecus was supposed to be extinct, and its known range never included North America. Unless Alaska's geographic isolation had preserved a population that science hadn't discovered yet. I kept the footage to myself and continued monitoring. Camera 12 captured the creature 3 days later, this time approaching a remote maintenance cabin near Kontishna. The footage showed it studying the building for over 2 hours, walking around the perimeter, examining windows and doors like it was learning the structure's vulnerabilities. The creature demonstrated problem-solving behavior when it tested the cabin's door handle, found it locked, then systematically checked each window until it found one that was loose. It didn't break in, just learned how it could, if it wanted to. That's when I got. They realized these beings weren't just territorial animals. They were studying human behavior, learning our patterns and weaknesses. The missing hiker report started a week later. Day hikers who never returned to their vehicles. Experienced backpackers whose GPS beacons went silent in areas with no geographic reason for signal loss. The search and rescue operations found personal belongings scattered along trails, but no bodies and no clear evidence of what had happened. I began tracking the disappearances on a map and noticed they all occurred in areas where I'd documented the creature sign. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. My private investigation led me to a cave system in a remote valley, about 15 miles northwest of Wonder Lake. I'd been following strange tracks for 3 days when I discovered the cave entrance, Ondation, a natural opening in the mountainside that was partially concealed by fallen rocks and vegetation. The smell hit me first, a musty, animal scent mixed with something else, something that made my stomach turn. I switched on my heavy-duty flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was larger than I'd expected, extending back into the mountain much farther than my light could reach. But it was what I found on the cave floor that nearly made me turn and run. Human belongings, lots of them, backpacks, hiking boots, camping gear, personal items scattered across the cave floor like the inventory of a lost and found department. But these weren't recent items. Some of the gear looked decades old. Faded fabrics, outdated equipment designs, metal camping supplies that hadn't been manufactured since the 1980 seconds. I photographed everything, documenting the scene with the same attention to detail I'd use for any official investigation. Watches, jewelry, driver's licenses, camping permits, dating back 30 years. People had been disappearing in this area for decades, and someone, or something, had been collecting their belongings. Deeper in the cave, I found what I'd been dreading. Bones. Human bones, cleaned with a precision that suggested tool use rather than scavenging. The remains were arranged in organized piles, sorted by type like the creature understood anatomy and had been deliberately processing the bodies. I was photographing the bone piles when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam revealing the massive creature standing in the cave entrance. Up close, it was even more intimidating than the camera footage had suggested. 8.5 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur, with powerful shoulders and arms that looked capable of crushing a person without effort. But it was the creature's eyes that terrified me most. They held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware, calculating, measuring me as a potential threat. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was a thinking being that understood exactly what I'd discovered. I stood perfectly still as the creature examined my ranger uniform, my equipment, my flashlight. It seemed particularly interested in my radio, approaching close enough that I could smell its breath, the mixture of meat and something wild that made my primitive brain scream warnings. The creature made a low sound, not quite a growl but a vocalization that sounded almost like speech. From deeper in the cave, I heard an answering call. Then another. And another. I wasn't facing one creature. I was facing an entire family group. More massive figures emerged from the cave's depths, at least 4 or 5 additional creatures of varying sizes. They moved with coordinated purpose, surrounding me but not attacking. They were evaluating me, deciding what to do. The largest creature, Tholide, the one I'd first encountered, reached out slowly and touched my radio with one enormous finger. When I didn't resist, it carefully lifted the radio from my belt and examined it closely. Then, it did something that nearly stopped my heart. It spoke into the radio, perfectly mimicking my voice. "Base station, this is Ranger Bradley. Everything's normal out here." The creature had been listening to park ranger communications. It understood how our radio system worked, could replicate human speech, and had been using this knowledge to monitor our activities. I realized that these beings had been watching park operations for years, learning our schedules, our protocols, our technology. They knew when rangers would be in specific areas and how to avoid us. They'd been staying one step ahead of human expansion into their territory through intelligence gathering. The creature handed my radio back to me, but kept my GPS unit and emergency beacon. A clear message. They were letting me leave, but they'd be monitoring my location. I backed slowly toward the cave entrance, never taking my eyes off the creatures. They watched me go, but made no move to follow. Once I was outside, I heard complex vocalizations from inside the cave, a language I couldn't understand, but that clearly conveyed sophisticated communication. The hike back to my vehicle took 14 hours. I was physically exhausted but mentally shattered by what I'd witnessed. These creatures weren't just surviving in Alaska's wilderness, reprise. They were thriving, using intelligence and planning that rivaled human capabilities. I wrote up a detailed incident report, complete with photographs, GPS coordinates, and physical evidence. My supervisor Jim read it twice, then locked it in his desk drawer. "Tom, this never happened," he said. "We can't have reports of unknown humanoid species in a national park. It would cause mass panic and destroy tourism revenue." Within a week, I was transferred to administrative duty at the Anchorage Regional Office. My 20 years of field experience were suddenly deemed better suited for paperwork and policy review. The official reason was career development opportunities, but everyone understood what had really happened. The missing hiker cases continue, but they're officially attributed to bear attacks or environmental hazards. The cave system I discovered has been quietly added to restricted access areas, with new regulations that prevent unauthorized entry. I still work for the Park Service, but I'll never see field duty again. Sometimes I wonder if the creatures are still out there, still watching, still learning. Alaska's wilderness is vast enough to hide entire populations of species that science considers extinct. I've seen intelligence in those yellow eyes that was almost human, but older. Much older. And I know that in the deepest parts of Denali, things still live that remember when this land belonged to them. The wilderness isn't empty. It's just very, very good at keeping its secrets. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I've been a wildlife photographer for 12 years. I started right after college with a beat-up camera and a dream to work for National Geographic. I've spent countless nights in freezing blinds, been charged by angry elephants in Kenya, and once waited 14 hours for the perfect shot of a snow leopard in Tibet. My work has taken me to every continent, but I always thought the most dangerous thing I'd face was a territorial grizzly or bad weather. I was wrong. What happened last September in Katmai National Park changed everything I thought I knew about the natural world. There are things out there that no camera can truly capture, things that shouldn't exist but do. The assignment seemed perfect when it came through. National Geographic wanted a photo series about how brown bears in Alaska were adapting to climate change. The pay was good, the location was stunning, and I'd have 3 weeks to get the shots I needed. Katmai is famous for its massive brown bears, especially around Brooks Falls where they catch salmon. I'd photographed there twice before and knew the park well. I flew into King Salmon on September 15th, then took a small bush plane to Brooks Camp. The weather was unusually warm for that time of year, which actually supported the climate change angle perfectly. Most tourists had already left for the season, so I'd have the wilderness mostly to myself, perfect for getting natural shots without human interference. My plan was simple but effective. I'd set up a network of remote trail cameras throughout the park to capture natural bear behavior when no humans were around. These weren't cheap tourist cameras. I was using 12 high-end Reconyx units, each worth about $3,000. They had infrared night vision, motion sensors, and GPS tracking. The batteries would last 2 weeks, and they could store thousands of photos and hours of video. I spent the first 2 days hiking through the park, placing cameras at strategic locations. Bear trails, salmon runs, berry patches, and territorial marking spots. Each camera was secured in a steel housing and chained to trees. I'd learned the hard way that curious bears could destroy equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars. The work was exhausting but satisfying. I covered over 30 miles on foot, carrying 60 pounds of equipment. By day 3, all 12 cameras were active and sending data to my laptop via satellite link. The technology still amazed me. I could sit in my tent and watch live footage from cameras miles away. That's when I first noticed something was off. I was reviewing footage from Camera 7, positioned near a salmon spawning area about 5 miles north of camp. A large male brown bear appeared on screen around 2:47 p.m. At first glance, he looked normal, massive build, dark brown fur, typical bear behavior. But something about his movement seemed wrong. Most bears have a distinctive rolling gait. Their shoulders sway as they walk, and their heads move in a predictable pattern. This bear walked differently. His stride was too even, too purposeful. It reminded me more of how a person walks when they're trying not to make noise. I figured it was just an unusually smart bear. After years of human contact, some bears do learn to behave differently around cameras and people. I made a note to focus on this particular bear and moved on to review footage from other cameras. That's when I found the impossible footage. Camera 11, positioned near Berry Creek, about 30 miles southeast of Camera 7, had captured the same bear at 3:15 p.m. the same day. Same distinctive markings, same massive size, same unusual gait, but there was no way a bear could travel 30 miles of rough wilderness in 28 minutes. I checked the timestamps 3 times. I verified the GPS coordinates of both cameras. The data was correct. Somehow, this bear had covered impossible distance in impossible time. My first thought was equipment malfunction. Maybe one of the camera's internal clocks was wrong, or the GPS was giving bad coordinates. But I'd calibrated everything personally, and these were professional-grade units. They don't just randomly fail. I started focusing my documentation on this specific bear. In the local records, I found references to a bear the Inupiat guides called the Wanderer. According to the notes, this bear had been spotted across impossible distances for over 3 years. Most people assumed it was just multiple bears with similar markings. The next morning, I hiked out to check, camera 7 inches person. I wanted to see if there were any technical issues I'd missed. The camera housing was intact, the chain secure, and all the LED indicators showed normal operation. But around the base of the tree, I found something that made my blood run cold. Mixed in with normal bear paw prints were prints that looked wrong. They had the right size and basic shape, but the claw marks were too precise, too evenly spaced. And some of the prints showed what looked like fingers instead of toes. That evening, I sat down with Tommy Anori, one of the senior Inupiat guides at Brooks Camp. Tommy had been working in Katmai for over 20 years, and his grandfather had hunted these lands long before it became a national park. "You're asking about the Wanderer," Tommy said when I described the bear. His expression grew serious. "My grandfather used to tell stories about Ijirak, spirits that could take any shape but always kept something human about them. He said they were neither animal nor human, but something caught between worlds. I'd heard similar legends in other places I'd worked, but I'd never given them much credence. Folklore was folklore. I was a scientist with cameras and GPS units. "Tommy, I need facts, not stories," I said. "This bear is showing up in impossible locations. There has to be a logical explanation." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "Some things don't have logical explanations, Elena. Some things just are." That night, I downloaded all the footage from the past week and spent hours analyzing it frame by frame. The more I studied this bear, the more disturbed I became. In several clips, he stood upright and examined my cameras with what looked like human curiosity. His eyes reflected light differently than other bears, more like human eyes than animal eyes. But the most unsettling footage came from camera 3, positioned overlooking a valley where a bear family had made their temporary den. The Wanderer appeared to live with a normal female bear and 2 cubs, but the family dynamics were all wrong. Normal bear families have clear hierarchies and behaviors. Cubs stay close to their mother and play together. The male, if present, is usually protective but distant. But in this family, the cubs seemed afraid of their father. They wouldn't approach him, and when he moved, they would immediately run to their mother. The Wanderer's behavior was equally strange. He ate salmon like a human might, using his paws like hands to carefully clean the fish before eating. He never slept with the family, but instead stood guard throughout the night, watching the surroundings like a sentry. I decided I needed to observe this bear family directly. On September 22nd, I hiked 6 miles to their valley, carrying my best telephoto equipment. I found a hiding spot about 200 yards away and set up for a day of observation. What I witnessed defied everything I knew about bear behavior. The Wanderer caught salmon with normal bear technique, but then he would sit upright and examine each fish before eating. He used tools, actual tools, picking up stones to crack open salmon heads to get at the brain matter. No bear does that. Tool use in bears is extremely rare and limited. More disturbing was how he interacted with his family. When the cubs played, he would watch them with an expression that seemed almost human, like a person trying to understand children's games. When the female approached him, he would touch her face with his paw in a gesture that was definitely not normal bear behavior. Around noon, something happened that changed everything. I was photographing the family when the female bear suddenly became agitated. She sniffed the air and looked directly toward my hiding spot. Bears have incredible noses. She detected my scent even at 200 yards distance. But instead of running or charging, she looked back at the Wanderer and made a sound I'd never heard a bear make. It was almost like speech, a low, modulated sound with distinct syllables. The Wanderer stood upright, looked directly at me, and spoke. "Elena." It was my name, spoken clearly in a voice I recognized. A voice that stopped my heart cold. It was my sister, Maria's voice. Maria, who had died in a car accident 2 years ago. Maria, who had never been to Alaska and had been terrified of wild animals her entire life. I dropped my camera and ran. I made it back to camp in record time, my heart pounding and my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. Stress, altitude, lack of sleep, the self-amum, something rational that would explain what I'd heard. But when I checked my footage that evening, the audio was clear. The Wanderer had spoken my name in my dead sister's voice. That night, I heard Maria calling to me from outside my tent. "Elena, por favor, don't leave me alone again." The voice was perfect, her accent, her inflection, even the way she used to mix Spanish and English when she was emotional. I knew that voice better than my own. I'd grown up hearing it every day for 26 years. But Maria was dead. I'd held her hand in the hospital as she died from injuries sustained in the crash. I grabbed my flashlight and searched around my campsite. The ground was soft from recent rain, and the tracks were clearly visible. Large bare paw prints circled my tent, but mixed among them were prints that looked disturbingly human. The next morning, I found my camera equipment had been moved. All my gear was still there, but someone had organized it differently. My lenses were arranged by focal length, my batteries were sorted by charge level, and my memory cards were stacked in perfect order. This wasn't random bare curiosity, This was human intelligence organizing equipment by function and purpose. I set up a night vision camera that evening, pointing it at my equipment. If something was manipulating my gear, I was going to document it. The footage I captured that night will haunt me forever. Around 2:30 a.m., the Wanderer approached my tent in bear form, but as I watched, his body began to change. His limbs stretched and reshaped, his posture became more upright, and his features shifted into something that was neither fully bear nor fully human. The thing that emerged was a nightmare hybrid, Grat, covered in dark fur but walking upright like a person, with hands that were too long and a face that was almost human but with bare eyes and teeth. It spent 20 minutes going through my equipment, handling each piece with obvious understanding of its purpose. But most terrifying was when it began to practice speech. "Elena, Elena, please don't go." The voice kept changing. Sometimes it was Maria's voice, sometimes a man's voice I didn't recognize, sometimes a child's voice. It was like listening to someone practice different recordings, trying to perfect the pronunciation. I realized with horror that some of those voices matched missing person reports I'd researched before coming to Alaska. People who had vanished in Katmai over the past few years, their cases never solved. The shapeshifter had been collecting voices from people who disappeared in these woods. I tried to pack up quietly the next morning, but the creature was watching. When I reached the trail leading back to the airstrip, the Wanderer blocked my path in full bear form. As I watched, it began shifting between human and bear characteristics, as if deciding which form would be most effective. The sight was nauseating, bones stretching and contracting, features flowing like melting wax. Then it spoke in Maria's voice. "Don't leave me alone again, Hermana. I've been waiting for you." The emotional manipulation was overwhelming. For a moment, I almost believed it was really Maria somehow. The voice was so perfect, so filled with the pain and love I remembered from our last conversation. But then I noticed the eyes. They were bear eyes, dark, predatory, and completely wrong in what looked like Maria's face. I understood then what this thing was. It fed on human emotional connections, somehow accessing memories and using them as weapons. It had learned Maria's voice by tapping into my grief and guilt over her death. The creature stepped closer, its form stabilizing into a perfect replica of my sister, except for those terrible bear eyes. "I missed you so much, Elena. Why didn't you come to my funeral?" That question broke the spell. I had been at Maria's funeral. I'd given the eulogy. This thing was fishing for emotional responses, trying to find the right buttons to push. I raised my camera and triggered the flash at maximum power. The bright burst of light seemed to cause the shapeshifter physical pain. It staggered backward, its form shifting rapidly between human and bear, as if the transformation process had been disrupted. I ran toward the river, knowing that water might provide an escape route. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the brush, making sounds that were neither fully human screams nor bear roars. At the riverbank, I looked back to see it pursuing me in a form that was nightmare fuel. Sometimes running on two legs like a person, sometimes dropping to all fours like a bear, its body constantly flowing between the two shapes. The shapeshifter reached the water's edge just as the current caught me. For a moment, it stood there, in a form that was horrible to look at. Maria's face on a bear's body, reaching toward me with two long arms. Then the transformation seemed to destabilize completely. The creature fell into the rapids, its body shifting uncontrollably as the water swept it downstream. I made it to the pickup point and caught my scheduled flight out. When I reported the incident to park authorities, they dismissed my footage as an elaborate hoax. The official report stated that I'd suffered altitude sickness and exhaustion, leading to hallucinations. But I know what I saw. I know what's still out there. I've left wildlife photography. I can't bring myself to work alone in remote locations anymore. Every shadow could be watching. Every familiar voice could be something wearing a stolen identity. Sometimes I still hear Maria's voice calling my name, and I have to remind myself that my sister is dead. The real Maria is gone, and whatever spoke to me in that Alaskan wilderness was something else entirely. If you're planning to work alone in remote areas, especially places with a history of missing persons, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if voices don't match the speakers, if familiar people appear in impossible places, if the natural world seems to be performing for an audience, don't investigate. Just run. Because some things in the wilderness are better left undocumented. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been a wilderness survival instructor for 15 years. I started teaching after serving 8 years as an Army Ranger, where I learned to survive in some of the harshest places on Earth. I've guided people through Amazon rainforests, Rocky Mountain blizzards, and Mojave Desert heat waves. I thought I'd seen everything nature could throw at me. But what happened last February in Alaska's gates of the Arctic National Park changed everything I believed about what lives in the wilderness. I run advanced survival courses for serious outdoor enthusiasts, the kind of people who want to learn traditional skills, not just how to use fancy gear. My February course was special. We were spending 10 days learning Inuit survival techniques during the polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for weeks. 8 students had signed up, each paying $5,000 for the privilege of learning in one of Earth's most extreme environments. The group was solid. Jennifer Park, a nurse from Seattle who wanted to challenge herself after her divorce. Mike Rodriguez, a firefighter from Phoenix looking to expand his cold weather skills. Ashley Kim, a college student studying environmental science. David Park, Jennifer's brother and an experienced rock climber. 4 others, all with good outdoor experience. They'd all passed my screening process and physical requirements. We flew into Coldfoot, then took a bush plane deeper into the park. The pilot, Tom Ukla, dropped us at a frozen lake surrounded by mountains. The temperature was minus 35 degrees, and it would only get colder. We had enough supplies for 10 days, plus emergency rations. Everything was planned to the minute. On our first night, we met William Kanguk at his cabin near the drop zone. William was 73, and a Nupiat elder who'd lived in the region his entire life. His grandfather had taught him the old ways, and he still trapped and hunted using traditional methods. I'd hired him as a cultural consultant to teach us authentic Inuit techniques. "You picked a dangerous time," William said, as we sat around his wood stove. "The Tornarsuk are active during polar night." I'd heard the word before in my research. Shadow beings, right? From Inuit folklore? William's face went serious. Not folklore, real as the ice under your feet. They hunt in the darkness, feed on human warmth. My grandfather saw them take 3 men in 1952. Found the bodies a week later, frozen solid but no wounds. Internal temperature so low it was like they'd been dead for days, but they'd only been missing 6 hours. Jennifer and Ashley exchanged nervous glances. I could see the story was affecting the group's mood. "William, I appreciate the cultural context," I said, "but I need to keep my students focused on real survival challenges. The Arctic environment is dangerous enough without worrying about mythical creatures." William shrugged. "Your choice, but stay close to your fires. And if you see shadows walking without bodies to cast them, don't follow them into the darkness." The next morning, we started our trek deeper into the park. The landscape was beautiful, but alien. Endless white broken by black rock formations and twisted Arctic willows. The silence was complete, except for our breathing and the crunch of snow under our boots. With no sun, we used headlamps and followed GPS coordinates to our planned campsites. On day 4, things started getting weird. We were practicing ice fishing when Jennifer called out, "Marcus, who's that over there?" I looked where she was pointing. About 50 yards away, near a cluster of rocks, a human-shaped shadow was moving across the snow. It walked upright like a person, but there was nothing casting it. No trees, no rocks tall enough, no buildings. Just empty air above a moving shadow. Probably just snow blowing in the wind, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. The shadow was too defined, too purposeful in its movement. Mike lowered his binoculars. That's not wind, it's walking. The shadow moved parallel to our group for about 30 seconds, then simply faded away. Not gradually, it just stopped existing. Trick of the light, I said. The polar night messes with depth perception. Your brain tries to make sense of limited visual input by creating patterns that aren't really there. But my digital thermometer had dropped from -28 to -43 degrees, while the shadow was visible. When it disappeared, the temperature returned to normal within minutes. I didn't mention this to the group. That night, Ashley reported feeling drained during her watch shift. When I checked her temperature with our medical thermometer, it read 95 degrees despite her wearing proper cold weather gear and staying active. I feel like something was pulling the heat right out of my body, she said. Like standing next to an open freezer, but the cold was coming from inside me. I had her drink hot chocolate and do jumping jacks until her core temperature normalized. Mild hypothermia could cause confusion and poor judgment, but her symptoms didn't match any cold exposure pattern I knew. The next morning, David found strange impressions in the snow around our camp. They looked like human footprints, but they had no depth. Instead of pressing into the snow, they seemed burned into the surface, leaving dark marks with crispy edges. The prints led in a circle around our tents, then stopped at the edge of our fire's light. These weren't here when I banked the fire at midnight, Mike said. He'd been on last watch and was certain about the timing. I photographed the prints with my digital camera, but they didn't show up in the images. The camera captured every detail of normal footprints and equipment, but the burned impressions appeared as unmarked snow in the photos. That evening, the shadows returned in force. Jennifer saw them first during dinner preparation. "There are people watching us from those rocks," she said. I counted at least 6 human-shaped shadows moving among the boulders 30 yards from camp. They walked upright, paused like they were observing us, then continued moving in coordinated patterns. But there was nothing to cast the shadows. I checked with binoculars and found empty space above each dark figure. "Everyone stay calm," I said. "Maintain normal activities, but keep your headlamps on and stay within the fire's light." The temperature began dropping rapidly. Our digital thermometers showed the air temperature falling from -30 to -45 degrees in less than 10 minutes. There was no wind, no weather front moving in. The cold seemed to be emanating from the shadow figures themselves. Mike pulled out his phone to record, but the battery died instantly despite being fully charged an hour before. Ashley's GPS unit shut down. My satellite communicator went dark. Only our analog thermometers and compass continued working normally. The shadows grew bolder as the equipment failed. They moved closer to camp, staying just outside the fire's light radius. I could see them clearly now, human-shaped but wrong somehow. They moved too smoothly, like they were gliding instead of walking. When they turned, they pivoted their entire bodies instead of just their heads. "Everyone gather around the main fire," I ordered. "Stay close together and keep feeding it wood." As my students huddled together, I noticed something terrifying. The shadows were patient. They didn't rush toward us or make threatening movements. They simply waited at the edge of the light, like predators who knew their prey would eventually make a mistake. I remembered William's words about them feeding on human warmth. Looking at my thermal imaging camera, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The shadows showed up as moving cold spots, human-shaped areas of absolute zero temperature, walking through the landscape. They weren't just cold. They were thermal voids, areas where heat energy was being actively absorbed. "Marcus," Ashley whispered. "My hands are going numb even inside my gloves." I checked her fingers with my flashlight. They were pale and cold despite being inches from the fire. The shadows were somehow draining heat from her body even at a distance. "David, Jennifer, build a second fire 15 feet from this one," I said. "Mike, Ashley, gather all our fuel. We need multiple heat sources." As we worked, the shadows began moving in a coordinated pattern. Some stayed near the rocks as decoys, while others circled toward our blind spots. They were hunting us with intelligence and strategy. David was carrying firewood to the second site when he stumbled and dropped his load. A shadow immediately moved toward him from the darkness. David's breath became visible in rapid puffs as the temperature around him plummeted. "Get back to the fire!" I shouted. David tried to run, but his movements became sluggish as his body heat was drained. The shadow kept pace with him, staying close as his core temperature dropped rapidly. By the time he reached the fire, his lips were blue and he was shivering uncontrollably. My thermometer read his body temperature at 89 degrees. In medical terms, he was in severe hypothermia despite being properly dressed and active just minutes before. "They're hunting us," Jennifer said, stating what we all realized. "Those things are systematically trying to kill us." I got on my satellite communicator, but the screen showed only static. The radio picked up no signals. Even our GPS coordinates were shifting randomly on the display. The shadows weren't just draining heat, they were interfering with all our electronic equipment. "We're going to have to signal for rescue the old way," I said. I built a large signal fire using wet wood to create smoke, then arranged rocks to spell "help" in letters 10 feet tall. During daylight hours, search aircraft would see the smoke and message from miles away. But the shadows had other plans. As soon as I moved away from the main fire to tend the signal fire, 3 shadows converged on my position. The temperature dropped so fast that the flames began to weaken. My exposed skin burned with cold despite my insulated clothing. I barely made it back to the group before hypothermia set in. The signal fire died within minutes, smothered by the supernatural cold the shadows carried with them. "We need to survive until morning," I told my students. "Then we get creative about rescue signals." We spent the night in shifts, with half the group feeding fires while the others rested. The shadows never left. They circled our camp like wolves, always staying just outside the light, waiting for our fuel to run low or for someone to make a fatal mistake. Ashley fell asleep during her watch shift and nearly didn't wake up. Her body temperature had dropped to 87 degrees, while the shadows moved closer to her position. We had to strip her down and warm her with body heat to prevent cardiac arrest. By dawn, we'd burned through most of our firewood. The shadows faded with the first hint of light, but I knew they'd return stronger the next night. I used our emergency flare gun to fire 3 red flares in the standard distress pattern. An hour later, we heard helicopter rotors in the distance. The Alaska State Troopers rescue helicopter approached our position, but something went wrong as it got closer. The pilot's radio transmissions became garbled, then cut out entirely. Through binoculars, I could see ice forming on the aircraft's windows despite the cabin heater running. The shadows had returned, even in daylight. They swarmed around the helicopter like angry bees, and the aircraft began losing altitude as its engines struggled against the supernatural cold. The pilot managed to set down hard about 100 yards from our camp. The engine died immediately, and frost covered every surface of the aircraft within seconds. "Everyone run to the helicopter," I shouted. "Stay together and move fast." We grabbed our packs and ran across the open snow. The shadows followed us, creating a moving zone of deadly cold that threatened to stop our hearts before we could reach safety. The pilot, Sarah Chen, was fighting to restart the engine when we reached the aircraft. "What the hell is happening?" she asked. "My instruments are showing impossible readings." "Just get us out of here," I said as my students piled into the cabin. Sarah managed to restart the engine, but the shadows were climbing onto the aircraft itself. The cabin temperature dropped below freezing as dark shapes pressed against the windows. Ice formed on the inside of the glass, and our breath became visible in the cabin. "They're trying to drain the engine heat," I realized. "If they kill the turbine, we're all dead." Sarah pulled maximum power and lifted off just as the engine temperature dropped into the red zone. The helicopter shuddered as the shadows clung to the landing skids, but we gained altitude slowly. At 200 feet, the shadows finally let go and fell back to the snow below. The cabin heater kicked in, and our instruments returned to normal operation. "What were those things?" Sarah asked as we flew toward Coldfoot. I looked down at the landscape below. In the snow around our abandoned campsite, I could see dozens of shadow figures moving in coordinated patterns. They were regrouping, waiting for the next group of humans foolish enough to enter their territory during the polar night. Something that's been hunting in the Arctic a lot longer than humans have been surviving there, I said. When we reached Coldfoot, I filed a report with the Park Service, but they classified it as a cold weather emergency with equipment failures. My students were treated for mild hypothermia and released. The official record shows we were rescued due to severe weather conditions. I still teach wilderness survival, but I've never returned to Alaska during polar night. William Kanguk died 3 months after our encounter, but not before he sent me a letter. In it, he wrote that his grandfather would be proud I'd listened to the old warnings and brought my students home alive. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed one more night. The shadows were getting stronger, more coordinated. They were learning our defensive strategies and adapting their hunting patterns. I've studied every piece of Inuit folklore I can find about the Tornarsuk. According to the stories, they've been taking travelers in the Arctic darkness for thousands of years. They're patient, intelligent, and absolutely deadly. If you ever find yourself in the Alaskan wilderness during polar night, keep your fires burning bright and stay close to your heat sources. And if you see shadows walking without bodies to cast them, don't try to investigate. Just pack up your camp and get out of there as fast as you can. Because some things in the wilderness hunt humans not for food or territory, but for the simple warmth that keeps us alive. And in the endless darkness of the polar night, that warmth makes us shine like beacons to creatures made of living cold. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for 11 years. I started when I was 18, right out of high school. My dad was a trucker too, and he taught me everything. How to handle a big rig in bad weather, how to read the road, how to stay awake on those endless midnight runs. I've driven through blizzards in Montana, ice storms in Nebraska, and desert heat waves in Arizona. I thought I'd seen everything the road could throw at me. But what happened last December on the Nabesna Road in Alaska changed everything I thought I knew about what's really out there on America's highways. I was based out of Denver at the time, working for Mountain West Logistics. The company specialized in getting supplies to remote locations, mining camps, research stations, places most drivers wouldn't go. The pay was good because the runs were dangerous. I liked the challenge, and the money helped me send some back to my mom in El Paso. In early December, my dispatcher called with a special contract. A research station in Wrangell Street, Elias National Park, needed emergency supplies before a big storm hit. The regular driver had called in sick, and they needed someone willing to take the Nabesna Road at night in winter conditions. The road was basically a dirt track that turned into a skating rink when it froze. Most truckers wouldn't touch it. The pay was triple my normal rate. I said yes. I picked up my load in Anchorage: medical supplies, food, and generator fuel. My truck was a 2019 Peterbilt 579 with good tires and a strong heater. I'd driven worse roads in worse weather. The GPS showed about 200 miles to the research station, with the last 80 miles on the Nabesna Road itself. Before leaving Anchorage, I stopped at a truck stop to fuel up and grab coffee. The place was nearly empty, just a few local drivers and the night clerk. While I was paying, an older guy in a Carhartt jacket came over. He had the weathered look of someone who'd been driving these roads for decades. "You heading out to Nabesna?" he asked, looking at my load manifest. "Yeah, first time on that road," I said. His face got serious. "You picked a hell of a night for it. Storm's coming in, and that road gets real lonely real fast." "I've driven in snow before," I said. "It's not the snow you need to worry about," he said quietly. "It's the hitchhiker," I laughed. "Come on, man, not you too." But he wasn't smiling. "I've been driving Alaska roads for 30 years. The hitchhiker is real. She shows up on remote highways, looks like someone who needs help. But if you stop for her..." He shook his head. "Lot of good drivers have gone missing on stretches like Nabesna." The clerk, a native woman in her 50s, nodded. "My uncle used to drive freight up north. He saw her once on the Dalton Highway. Said she looked normal until she got close to his truck. Then he saw her eyes, completely black, like holes in her face. He gunned it and never stopped." "What's supposed to happen if you pick her up?" I asked, still not taking it seriously. The older driver leaned closer. "Nobody who's picked her up has ever come back to tell us." I thanked them for the warning, but inside I was rolling my eyes. Every profession has its ghost stories. Truckers talk about phantom hitchhikers, ghost trucks, and haunted rest stops, the same way nurses talk about spirits in hospitals or cops talk about haunted precincts. It's just part of the culture. I hit the road around 10 p.m. The first 100 miles went fine. I know standard Alaska highway, well-maintained and marked. My CB radio picked up chatter from other drivers heading different directions. The heater kept the cab comfortable, and my GPS showed I was making good time. Then I reached the turnoff for Nabesna Road. The difference was immediate. The pavement ended and became a rough dirt and gravel surface. My headlights showed tire ruts frozen solid in the mud. Snow started falling harder, and the wind picked up. Trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches heavy with ice. My GPS signal got weaker. The CB radio started crackling with static. I wasn't worried yet. Remote areas always had communication problems. I just focused on keeping the truck centered on the narrow road and maintaining a steady speed. About 50 miles in, my headlights caught something ahead. At first, I thought it was a road sign or maybe a broken-down vehicle, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, standing beside the road. She was wearing a heavy winter coat and waving at me. My first thought was relief that I'd found her before she froze to death. It was 30 below zero out there. Nobody could survive long in those conditions without shelter. I slowed down and pulled over. The woman approached my truck, and I rolled down the passenger window. She looked normal, pretty, with long dark hair visible under her hood, but something felt off about the way she moved. She seemed to glide over the snow instead of walking through it. "Thank God," she said, and her voice sounded perfectly normal. "I've been stuck here for hours. My car broke down about a mile back. Can you give me a ride to Fairbanks?" I hesitated. Every instinct I'd developed in 11 years of trucking was screaming at me not to let her in. But I couldn't leave someone to die in the cold. That went against everything my father had taught me about being a trucker. I didn't. We help each other on the road. "Sure, climb in," I said. She opened the passenger door and got into the cab. Immediately, the temperature dropped. My breath started forming clouds even though the heater was running full blast. I figured the cold air from outside was just taking a while to warm up. "I'm Carlos," I said, putting the truck back in gear. "Sarah," she replied, but she didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead out the deck windshield. As we drove, I tried to make conversation. "What were you doing out here? This isn't exactly a tourist area." "Work," she said. "What kind of work?" "Research." That made sense. The area had several research stations studying everything from wildlife to climate change. But when I glanced over at her, something made my blood freeze. I couldn't see her breath. In the frigid cab, my breath was forming thick clouds with every word. But Sarah wasn't breathing visible vapor at all. It was like the cold air wasn't affecting her. I looked in my rearview mirror, trying to get a better look at her, but I couldn't see her reflection. The passenger seat looked empty in the mirror, even though she was sitting right there next to me. My GPS started acting up. Instead of showing our location on Nabesna Road, it displayed coordinates that made no sense. The screen flickered between different locations, sometimes showing us in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, sometimes in places that didn't exist. The radio crackled to life, picking up a clear signal despite our remote location. A voice came through that made my heart stop. It was my own voice. "This is Carlos Mendoza, Mountain West Logistics Truck 847. I'm overdue on my delivery run to Wrangell Street, Elias. Last known position was mile marker 50 on Nabesna Road. Truck is a 2019 Peterbilt, blue cab, white trailer. But I wasn't overdue. According to my watch, I was actually ahead of schedule." I looked over at Sarah. She was smiling now, but it wasn't a normal smile. Her teeth were too sharp, and there were too many of them, like a shark's mouth in a human face. "Problem with the radio?" she asked, and her voice had changed. It was deeper now, like multiple people talking at once. I tried to keep driving, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The heater had completely stopped working, and frost was forming on the inside of the windshield. I could barely see the road ahead. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. Sarah turned to look at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like looking into deep holes in her face. "I've been waiting for someone like you," she said. Someone driving alone on a cold night. Someone far from help. The radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice, an older man. This is Bill Henderson, Henderson Trucking. My truck never made it to the Nobsna delivery. I've got a wife and kids in Fairbanks. If anyone hears this, tell them I love them. Then another voice, younger. This is Mike Rodriguez. I was supposed to deliver to the mining camp, the woman in my truck. She's not human. She's something else. Don't stop for hitchhikers on this road. Don't stop for anyone. More voices followed, dozens of them. All truckers, all reporting themselves missing or overdue on this same road. Some of the voices sounded old, like recordings from decades ago. I looked at the odometer. It showed I'd driven over 200 miles since picking up Sarah, but the mile markers on the road kept showing the same numbers: 52, 53, 54, 52, 53, 54. We were driving in some kind of loop. You're starting to understand, Sarah said. Her voice kept changing, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes multiple voices speaking in harmony. Time works differently here. This stretch of road exists outside normal space. I've been collecting travelers for a very long time. I tried to steer off the road, but the wheel wouldn't respond. The truck kept following the same path, no matter what I did. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, but our speed remained constant. The truckers you heard on the radio are still here, Sarah continued. They drive this road forever, their life slowly draining away to feed me. Would you like to meet them? I looked ahead and saw headlights approaching. Not one set, but dozens. Trucks from different eras were driving toward us. Old Kenworths from the 1980 seconds, vintage Macs from the 1970 seconds, even some ancient rigs that looked like they were from the 1950 seconds. As they passed us going the opposite direction, I could see the drivers. They looked ancient, withered, but their eyes were alert and terrified. Some had been driving this loop so long they looked more like skeletons than living people. That will be you soon, Sarah said. Unless you make a different choice. What choice? I asked. Help me collect more travelers. Become my partner instead of my victim. Use your CB radio to guide other truckers to this road. Tell them there's easy money or someone who needs help. Do this, and I'll let you return to your normal life. I pretended to consider it while my mind raced. The CB radio was still working, somehow picking up signals from the outside world. If I could get a message out. Okay, I said, I'll help you. Sarah smiled with her sharp teeth. I knew you were smart. I reached for the CB radio and keyed the microphone. But instead of calling truckers to the road, I broadcast a warning. This is Carlos Mendoza to any driver who can hear this. Stay away from Nobsna Road. Don't pick up hitchhikers in remote Alaska. There's something out here that's not human. It traps people in some kind of time loop. If you get this message, tell my family in El Paso that I love them. Sarah's face changed completely. Her features shifted and warped until she didn't look human at all. She lunged at me, but something strange happened. The radio broadcast seemed to weaken her. She flickered like a bad TV signal. You can't escape, she screamed. This road is mine. These drivers are mine. But I noticed something. While she was distracted by rage, the truck's steering wheel responded to my touch for the first time. I yanked it hard to the right, sending us off the road and into the trees. The truck crashed through branches and underbrush. Sarah was screaming in languages I didn't recognize. The world outside the windows started changing. Instead of forest, I saw glimpses of a massive truck accident, twisted metal and burning fuel. That's when I understood. This thing wasn't just a random monster. It was created by some terrible accident on this road, probably decades ago. It was tied to this specific place by tragedy and death. I kept driving through the ghost landscape until I saw the scene clearly, a multi-vehicle accident from what looked like the 1960 seconds. Several trucks had collided in a blizzard, creating a massive pileup. I could see drivers trapped in their cabs, calling for help that never came. I aimed my truck directly at the center of the accident scene. If this entity was bound to that tragedy, maybe I could break its hold by confronting it directly. The moment my truck reached the accident site, everything changed. Sarah vanished with a final scream. The world snapped back to normal reality. I was driving on the regular Nobsna Road again, no longer in the supernatural loop. My GPS came back online, showing my correct location. The radio cleared up, picking up normal CB chatter. The heater started working again. I drove straight to the research station and made my delivery. The scientists there were surprised to see me. According to them, I was actually 3 hours early, not late. Time had been moving differently in that supernatural loop. I never reported what happened officially. Who would believe it? I finished my contract and drove back to Denver. But I couldn't stop thinking about those other drivers, still trapped on that cursed stretch of road. I quit long-haul trucking the next month. Now I drive local delivery routes around Denver. I stay in the city, on well-traveled roads with plenty of traffic. But sometimes, late at night when I'm listening to the CB radio, I still hear voices calling for help from remote highways across Alaska. And I know that thing is still out there, waiting for the next lone driver to stop for what looks like someone who needs help. If you're a trucker reading this, take my advice. If you ever find yourself on a remote road and see someone hitchhiking, especially in Alaska, don't stop. No matter how much they look like they need help. Some things are worse than leaving someone stranded. Some things are worse than dying in the cold.